This is Jacob's Algebra, Chapter 13, Lesson 5, Part 2, Solving Quadratic Equations by Taking Square Roots. So when we stopped Part 1 of this video, we were working on problem number 7, which was x plus 4 squared equals 15. Part A said to solve it by the square root method, and that's what you see written on the whiteboard right now, is the square root method. We took the square root of both sides, and when we took the square root of the right side, we said plus or minus of that square root, and then we solved for x. So x equals -4 plus or minus the square root of 15. Part B says to write the equation in standard form and try to solve it by the factoring method. So that's what we're going to do for Part B. So we're going to first start by writing out what the equation was. X plus 4 squared equals 15. And to solve it by the factoring method, the first thing we have to do is multiply out our square. So x plus 4 quantity squared, we square our first term, and then we write the double of the product of the first and second terms. So 2 times x times 4 is 8x. And then we square our last term, which is 4. So the square of 4 is 16. And then we set that equal to 15. Now, to put this in standard form, we have to have the right side equal to 0. So to set the right side equal to 0, we need to subtract 15 from both sides. So we get x squared plus 8x plus 1 equals 0. Now we need to try to factor this. Okay, we know we're going to start off with an x times an x. And then we need to look at what are the factors of 1. Well, the factors of 1 are 1 and 1. That's the only thing we can multiply to get 1. Well, can we add our factors here, 1 and 1, to get 8? No, we can't. This is not factorable. So when it says write the equations in standard form and try to solve it by the factoring method, we actually can't solve it by the factoring method because there's nothing that we can put over here that's going to multiply to 1 and add to 8. So the factoring method will not work for this problem. Okay. So now so that was problem number 7. And problem number 7 is just like problem number 15 that I assigned for homework. So now let's look at problem number 8. Problem number 8 says this exercise is about the equation 3x minus 6 squared equals 45. For part A, it says to solve it by the square root method, simplifying your answers as much as possible. So when you're solving by the square root method, we take the square root of both sides. So that's what I'm going to do here. The square root of 3x minus 6 squared is just 3x minus 6. The square root of 45 is plus or minus the square root of 45. 45 is not a square number, but it does have a square factor. We can rewrite this as plus or minus the square root of 9 times 5 because 9 times 5 is 45. 9 is a square number. When we take the square root of 9, we get 3. So this is plus or minus 3 times the square root of 5 because the 5 is left behind in the square root. So I'm going to rewrite this problem as 3x minus 6 equals plus or minus 3 times the square root of 5. Now we need to try to get the x term by itself. Right now we're subtracting 6 from it, so to undo that we're going to add 6. So we'll add 6 to both sides, and we get 3x equals 6 plus or minus 3 times the square root of 5. Now we need to get our x by itself. We're multiplying it by 3, so to undo that we need to divide by 3. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. 3x over 3 is just an x. On the right side, we have 6 plus or minus 3 square root 3 divided by 3. Well, everything has a common factor of 3. 3 goes into 6 2 times, and then 3 goes into 3 1 time. So 6 plus or minus 3 root 3 over 3 is going to be 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. Now, I'm fine with you leaving your answer in this form, but if you would like to, you can go ahead and write it as 2 plus the square root of 3 and 2 minus the square root of 3. If there is a radical in your answer, you can leave it in plus or minus form. The only time that I'm going to demand that you go ahead and write it as 2 separate numbers is when they're actual integers or fractions. If there's a square root in it, you can leave it in plus or minus form. Okay, so now let's look at part B. Part B says express your answer in decimal form correct to the nearest thousandth. So what we need to do here is look at our two answers, the 2 plus square root 3 and 2 minus square root 3, and see what those numbers actually are. So what is 2 plus the square root of 3 to the nearest thousandth? That's going to be 2 plus, where are we? This is number 8b. That's going to be 2 plus 2.236. And 2 minus square root of 3 is going to be 2 minus 2.236. So 2 plus 2.236 is going to be 4.236. And 2 minus 2.236 is going to be negative 2, I'm sorry, is going to be negative 0.236. It's a decimal there. So those are our two answers for part B. And that's as far as we need to go. So you can punch square root of 3 into your calculator to get this answer, or you can use the square root tables that are in your book on page 563, but it's probably going to be easiest just to do that on your calculator. So this was problem number 8, which is just like problem number 16 that I assigned for homework. So the next one we're going to look at is problem number 9. So problem 9 says, solve the following quadratic equations by the square root method. So you know that the square root method is what we're going to use to solve these. So we're going to start off by looking at part B. Part B says x minus 5 squared equals 4. With the square root method, the first thing that we're going to do is take our square root since we're already in square form. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. On the left side, I have x minus 5. On the right side, I have plus or minus 2. Remember to always write plus or minus. Now I need to get the x term by itself. To do that, I need to add 5 to both sides. So x is equal to 5 plus or minus 2. Now, since there's no square root in this answer, I need to go ahead and find what these two numbers are. So our x is going to equal 5 plus 2 is 7. 5 minus 2 is negative 3. Make sure you don't just write 7 minus 3 because that's not your answer. Do not write that. If your answers are 7 and negative 3, you need to show me that they're two separate answers. 7 comma negative 3 or 7 and negative 3. Do something to show me that those are two separate answers. You can even write x equals 7 and then x equals negative 3 if you would like to do it that way. Okay, let's look now at part D. So we're still going to do number 9. This time we're looking at part D, which is x plus 1 squared equals 10. Notice that for this problem, they always go ahead and give you the left side already in square form. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. On my left side, I get x plus 1. On my right side, I have plus or minus the square root of 10. Now, we can't simplify the square root of 10 any further because the factors of 10 are 2 and 5, and those are both prime numbers. So we can't simplify this. Now we need to solve for x. We are adding 1 to x right now, so to undo that, we need to subtract 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, so I will get x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 10. And I'm fine with stopping here for your answer, or you can go ahead and write out negative 1 plus the square root of 10 and negative 1 minus the square root of 10. So you can leave it in plus or minus form, or you can write out your two separate answers. Please do not punch square root 10 into your calculator and give me a decimal answer. I don't want a decimal answer for this. Go ahead and give me your answer in radical form. Don't give a decimal answer unless the problem actually says to give a decimal answer. So now let's look at one more part from number 9. We're going to look at part E. Number 9E is 2x minus 3. Whoops. I was saying 3, so that's what I wrote. 2x minus 3 squared is equal to 81. Solving it by the square root method, we will take the square root of both sides. On the left side, we will end up with 2x minus 3. On the right, we're going to have plus or minus 9 because 9 is the square root of 81. Now, right now we are subtracting 3 from our x term, so to undo that we need to add 3. And when we add 3 to the left side, we have to add 3 to the right side. So we will have 2x equals 3 plus or minus 9. Now we're not done yet. This is what 2x equals. We need to find out what x is, so we need to divide both sides by 2. So our x will equal 3 plus or minus 9 over 2. Well, 3 plus 9 is 11. I'm sorry, it's not 11. Can't think here. 3 plus 9 is 12. So our first answer is going to be 12 over 2. And then 3 minus 9 is negative 6. So then we will have negative 6 over 2. But these fractions can both be simplified. So you need to go ahead and simplify these. Do not end up giving me a final answer of 12 halves and negative 6 halves. Go ahead and simplify. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So our final answers are x equals 6 and x equals negative 3. Okay, so that was number 9, which is just like number 17 that I assigned for homework. Okay, so now we're going to look at the last problem. This is number 10 in set 2. Well, the last problem we're going to do. It says solve the following quadratic equations by expressing the left sides as squares of binomials and using the square root method. So let's look at part B. For part B, we have x squared plus 16x plus 64 is equal to 45. Now they tell you for number 10 that the left side is the square of a binomial. So let's see what square this is. We know when we take the square root of x squared, we get x. When we take the square root of 64, we get 8. Our middle term is positive, so we can put a plus in between. Now we need to check and make sure this works. X squared is x squared. 8 squared is 64. 2 times x times 8 is 16x, so it works. So we have x plus 8 squared equals 45. Now we need to take the square root of both sides. When we take the square root of the left side, we get x plus 8. When we take the square root of the right side, we get plus or minus the square root of 45. 45 is not a square number, but it does have a square factor. We can rewrite that as 9 times 5. 9 is a square number. The square root is 3. So we can say plus or minus 3 times the square root of 5. So I'm going to rewrite this problem as x plus 8 equals plus or minus 3 square root 5. Now, right now I'm adding 8 to our x, so I need to subtract 8. So x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus 3 square root 5. And you can stop right there for your answer, or you can write it out as two separate answers. Negative 8 plus 3 square root 5 and negative 8 minus 3 square root 5. I'm fine with you leaving it in this plus or minus form because it does have a radical in it. So now let's look at part C. Number 10, part C, is 4x squared plus 20x plus 25 is equal to 25. So we know that this left side is a square. So I'm going to go ahead and write a binomial squared. We need to take the square root of our first term. The square root of 4x squared is 2x. The square root of our last term, 25, is 5. And our middle term is, our sign in the middle is going to be positive because our middle term is positive. Now we need to make sure this works. 2x when we square it is 4x squared. 5 when we square it is 25. 2 times 2x times 5 is 20x. So that works. And then this is equal to 25. For the square root method, we need to take the square root of both sides. The square root of the left side is going to be 2x plus 5. The square root of the right side is going to be plus or minus 5. So now to solve this, we need to subtract 5 from both sides. So we get 2x equals negative 5 plus or minus 5. And then we need to divide both sides by 2. So we end up with x equals negative 5 plus or minus 5 over 2. Our two answers are going to be negative 10 over 2 and 0 over 2, which simplifies to negative 5 and to 0. So our x will equal negative 5 and 0. And that is all. Number 10 is just like number 18 that I assigned for homework.